The human stood there, covered in dust and blood that wasn't hers, and had the audacity to smile at me. I am Commander Vex'thar of the Kethros Imperial Fleet, victor of 12 planetary conquests, decorated 17 times for tactical brilliance. I have never, in my 400 cycles of service, been smiled at by a prisoner. "Disarm yourself," I said, my translator converting my clicks and hisses into her primitive language. "Place your weapons on the ground," slowly. She tilted her head, blonde hair matted with debris from the firefight. Her blue eyes, impossibly bright against the grime on her face, studied me with an intensity that made my secondary hearts skip. "Yeah, about that," she said, her voice carrying that strange lilt humans used when amused. "I'm going to have to respectfully decline, Commander." Behind me, my 4 tactical officers shifted nervously. The human settlement we had just raided was supposed to be a research outpost. 12 scientists, maybe a handful of security personnel. Easy pickings before we moved on to the main colony. Instead, we had walked into 7 hours of absolute hell. This woman, the single human who called herself Lieutenant Riley Voss, had turned our textbook operation into a nightmare. 17 of my soldiers were dead, 32 wounded, and she stood there in the ruins of her laboratory, surrounded by the bodies of her own people, still holding that ridiculous chemical projectile weapon humans were so fond of. "You are alone," I pointed out, gesturing with my lower arms while keeping my primary hands on my plasma rifle. "Your facility is destroyed. Your colleagues are deceased. There is no logical reason to continue resistance." "Logic," she repeated, laughing. Actually laughing. "You know what's funny about you, Kethros? You guys read all our military history, studied our tactics, analyzed our wars, but you missed the most important part." I flexed my mandibles in irritation. "Humans and their constant talking. Enlighten me, then, before I am forced to kill you." "Humans don't fight because it's logical, Commander. We fight because we're really, really bad at towing when to quit." She moved then, faster than my combat computer predicted. The projectile weapon barked 3 times. One of my officers dropped, his helmet shattered. I returned fire, but she was already rolling behind a workstation, her movements fluid despite obvious injuries. "Tactical assessment," I snapped into my comm. "Sir, she is using the laboratory equipment as cover. Thermal scans indicate she is wounded in at least 4 locations. Blood loss suggests she has perhaps 20 minutes of combat effectiveness remaining." 20 minutes. I had faced enemies with superior technology, greater numbers, better positions. I could wait 20 minutes. "Fall back to defensive positions," I ordered. "We wait for her to collapse." "Ah, that's no fun," her voice echoed from somewhere in the wreckage. "Come on, Kander. I thought you Kethros were supposed to be these big bad warriors, conquerors of worlds. And you're gonna let one bleeding human ruin your whole afternoon?" I felt my thermal pits flare hot with anger. She was baiting me. Obviously, crudely, and yet, "You know what they told us in basic training," she continued, her voice moving, keeping mobile even now. "They said if you ever run into Kethros forces, don't bother running. You guys are faster, stronger, better equipped. So you know what we should do instead." I tracked her heat signature, calculating firing solutions. "Make you regret ever landing on our planet." The laboratory section she was hiding behind exploded outward. Not from my weapons. She had rigged their own research equipment to detonate. The blast threw 2 of my soldiers backward, their armor cracked and smoking. In the chaos, she appeared on top of a storage unit, that weapon of hers already firing. Another of my team went down. Then she was gone again, disappearing into a ventilation shaft that should have been too small for a human to fit through. "Sir," my second officer, Krell, clicked nervously. "Perhaps we should request backup. This human is abnormally effective." "We do not need backup to handle 1 wounded human," I roared. But even as I said it, I felt the doubt creeping in. The next 45 minutes were a lesson in humility I had never asked for. She turned their research station into a maze of death. Tripwires connected to chemical explosives, doors rigged to release their atmospheric coolants. She hacked into our communication frequencies and actually sang, Some horrible human battle song about fire and thunder while she picked off my soldiers one by one. When we finally cornered her in what appeared to be a medical bay, I had lost 12 more soldiers. My force of 30 had been reduced to 6. 6 against one human who, by all rights, should have bled out an hour ago. She was slumped against a medical pod, her weapon finally empty, discarded beside her. Her left arm hung used. Blood soaked through her tactical vest in at least a dozen places. Her face had gone pale, her breathing shallow. Now, I said, advancing slowly, my weapon trained on her center mass. You will surrender. She looked up at me, and impossibly, she was still smiling. You guys really don't get it, do you? Get what? Human, you have lost. Your resistance was admirable, but ultimately futile. Surrender, and I will make your end quick. Commander, she said, her voice weaker now but somehow still carrying that edge of amusement. You ordered me to disarm. That was your first mistake. You are disarmed, your weapon is empty. Yeah, my gun is empty. She reached behind her with her good arm, and I tensed, ready to fire. But I'm not. She pulled out a small device, no larger than her palm. A detonator. See, the thing about human researchers, we're curious. We experiment. And 6 months ago, we were running tests on something really interesting. Antimatter containment. Small-scale stuff, barely enough to power a scout ship. My thermal pits went cold. You're bluffing. If you detonate antimatter here, you die too. Yeah. Well, like I said, we're really bad at knowing when to quit. She pressed her thumb against the trigger. So here's how this is going to go. Commander, you and your remaining soldiers are going to get back on your fancy ship. You're going to leave this planet, and you're going to tell whoever's in charge of your little invasion that Earth is off limits. One human cannot dictate terms to the Kethros Empire. One human with enough antimatter to vaporize everything in a 20-kilometer radius can. Her hand shook, whether from blood loss or emotion. I couldn't tell. I've got maybe 5 minutes of consciousness left, Commander. And I swear on everything I love, if I'm going to die today, I'm taking every last one of you with me. Krell moved beside me. Sir, antimatter signatures detected. She is not bluffing. Yield is consistent with her claims. I stared at this impossible human. This creature who should have died hours ago. Who was still fighting even as her life bled away. Who was willing to obliterate herself just to take us with her. In that moment, I understood what all our intelligence briefings had missed. Humans weren't dangerous because of their technology or their tactics. They were dangerous because they were absolutely, completely insane. We withdraw, I said quietly. Sir, Krell protested. We cannot let one human. We withdraw. Now, as we retreated toward our landing craft, I kept my sensors locked on that medical bay. The human, Riley Voss, sat there bleeding, her hand on that detonator, watching us leave. When we reached orbit, my communications officer approached me. Commander, the High Council is demanding an explanation for our retreat. They say, tell them, I interrupted, still staring at the planet below, that we have encountered an enemy that cannot be conquered through conventional means. Tell them that humans do not surrender because it would be logical. They surrender only when every last option has been exhausted. And even then, they find new options we didn't know existed. And the human? The one with the antimatter? I pulled up the surveillance feed from her laboratory one last time. She was still there, slumped against the medical pod. But the detonator was no longer in her hand. She had placed it carefully beside her, its trigger unpressed. She had been bluffing about using it, but she hadn't been bluffing about being willing to. Log it, I said. Lieutenant Riley Voss, human designation. Classification, extreme threat. Recommendation, avoid engagement at all costs. Is that all, sir? I watched as human medical teams rushed into the facility, saw them surround her, begin emergency treatment. Against all probability, it looked like she might survive. No, I said. Add one more thing. Personal note from Commander Vex'thar. When she recovers, tell her she earned my respect. Sir, just do it. As we jumped to faster-than-light travel, leaving that cursed planet behind, I made a decision. The High Council wanted Earth. They wanted its resources, its strategic position, its what. They could have it. But they would have to find someone else to take it. I had spent 400 cycles conquering worlds. I had faced enemies of every type, but I had never, until today, encountered an enemy that scared me. Humans didn't fight wars the way civilized species did. They didn't calculate cost versus benefit. They didn't know when they were beaten. They just kept fighting, kept adapting, kept finding new ways to make you regret ever crossing them. And when you finally thought you had won, when you had them cornered and helpless, they would smile at you and show you just how much damage a desperate human could do. The High Council would call me a coward for retreating. Let them send someone else to face humanity's defenders. I was done. Because that human, bleeding and broken and facing impossible odds, had taught me something our empire had forgotten in its centuries of easy victories. Sometimes, the scariest enemy isn't the one with the biggest weapons or the most soldiers. It's the one who absolutely refuses to lose. 3 months later, I stood before the Grand Council of Kethros Prime, my military decorations feeling heavier than usual. Commander Vex'thar, High Chancellor Draxkor's voice boomed through the chamber, his 12 eyes narrowing at me in displeasure. You will explain, in detail, why a force of 30 elite soldiers retreated from a single wounded human. The council chamber fell silent. 200 of the Empire's highest officials waited for my response. Their thermal signatures indicated varying degrees of anger, curiosity, and contempt. I had prepared for this moment. 3 months to think about what I would say. How I would justify the unjustifiable. Honored Council, I began. I retreated because continuing the engagement would have resulted in total loss of my unit with 0 tactical gain. 0 tactical gain? Draxkor's thermal pits flared bright orange. The facility contained weapons research, technology that could have been repurposed for our use. The facility was rigged to explode. The human possessed an antimatter detonator with sufficient yield. We know about the detonator. Another counselor, Threshna, slammed her lower appendages against the floor. Intelligence reports indicate she never activated it. You were deceived, Commander. Tricked by a primitive species barely capable of interstellar travel. The murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. I felt my military career evaporating with each passing second. Permission to present additional evidence, I said. Draxkor gestured impatiently. Proceed. I activated the holographic display, and the council chamber filled with images. Combat footage from my helmet recorder, the laboratory, the bodies, and Riley Voss, smiling through the blood and pain. This is Lieutenant Riley Voss, I said. Age 28 standard cycles. Education in chemical engineering and molecular biology. No formal military training beyond basic civil defense courses. She was, according to all intelligence, a scientist. I let that sink in for a moment. In 7 hours, this scientist killed 17 of my soldiers, wounded 32 more. She did this using improvised weapons, environmental hazards, and what humans call psychological warfare. When we finally cornered her, mortally wounded and disarmed, she still found a way to force our retreat. Because you were weak, someone shouted from the back. No, I said coldly, because I was smart enough to recognize what I was facing. I changed the hologram, pulling up data I had spent 3 months compiling. After the engagement, I conducted extensive research into human military history. I studied their wars, their conflicts, their methods of combat. And I found something the Conquest Planning Committee missed. New images appeared. Ancient human warriors, modern soldiers, civilians fighting in ruined cities. Always fighting. Humans have been at war with themselves for their entire recorded history. 5,000 cycles of continuous conflict. They have fought over resources, religion, territory, ideology, and sometimes for reasons so trivial our translators cannot adequately explain them. I pulled up casualty statistics, battle analyses, historical records. In one conflict alone, what they call World War II, they suffered over 70 million dead. 70 million. And when it ended, when the killing finally stopped, do you know what they did? Silence. They rebuilt. They recovered. And within 40 cycles, They were preparing to fight the next war. Humans do not learn to avoid conflict from their losses. They learn to fight better. Draxcor's mandibles clicked in what might have been grudging interest. Continue. The Kethros Empire has conquered 47 worlds in the last millennium. We have faced species with superior technology, greater numbers, even some with comparable military capability. But we have never faced a species with humanity's combination of innovation, adaptability, and sheer stubborn refusal to accept defeat. I brought up the image of Riley Voss again, that impossible smile frozen in time. This human, this scientist with no formal combat training, held off 30 elite soldiers for 7 hours using nothing but improvised weapons and tactics she invented on the spot. Now imagine what a trained human soldier could do. Imagine 100 of them, 1,000, 1,000,000. The council chamber had gone very quiet. Earth has a population of 9 billion humans. Their industrial capacity, while primitive by our standards, is vast. They have recently achieved basic faster-than-light capability. They have nuclear weapons, biological weapons, chemical weapons, and apparently antimatter containment technology we knew nothing about. I let the numbers hover in the holographic display, but none of that is what makes them dangerous. What makes them dangerous is that they will never, ever stop fighting. You can destroy their cities, kill their soldiers, occupy their territory, and somewhere in some basement or bunker or cave, a human will be figuring out how to hurt you back. Threshna leaned forward. You are suggesting we abandon the Earth conquest entirely. I am suggesting that conquering Earth would cost more than it could ever be worth. Every human soldier we kill makes 100 more determined to fight harder. Every city we destroy becomes a symbol of resistance. Every victory we achieve teaches them how to defeat us next time. Coward, someone muttered. I turned to face the direction of the voice. 16 cycles ago, I led the conquest of Thalmir, a heavily defended world with orbital weapons platforms and a unified military force. We took it in 43 days with minimal casualties. 8 cycles ago, I pacified the Greth insurgency, a species known for their guerrilla tactics and fanatical dedication. It took 6 months. I paused, letting my record speak for itself. I have been called many things in my career. Coward is not one of them. I am simply telling you what every soldier who has fought humans throughout their history eventually learned. You can win every battle and still lose the war. Draxcor rose from his seat, his massive form dominating the chamber. And yet, Commander, other council members have presented alternative analyses. Fleet Admiral Korthax, for instance, believes that a full-scale invasion with overwhelming force would crush human resistance before it could organize. Admiral Korthax has never faced a human in combat, I said flatly. Neither had you before this incident. Exactly, which is why I am the only member of this council who can speak with authority on the subject. The bold statement drew gasps. You did not challenge the High Chancellor so directly, but I was already finished. My career was over. The moment I retreated from that laboratory, I might as well speak the truth. Send Korthax if you want, I continued. Send a fleet of 1,000 ships. Blockade their planet, glass their cities from orbit, show them the full might of the Kethros Empire, and then watch as the survivors crawl from the rubble and start building weapons to shoot down your ships. I turned off the holographic display and faced the council directly. Or consider this alternative. We have 300 other worlds in this sector. Most are uninhabited, rich in resources, and require 0 military expenditure to claim. We could colonize 50 planets with the resources it would take to conquer Earth. Why choose the one that will fight us every single day for the next 1,000 cycles? Because, Draxcor said quietly, they are a potential threat. Today, they have primitive, faster-than-light travel. Tomorrow, they could be rivals to our empire. Then negotiate, trade, establish diplomatic relations. Humans are capable of cooperation when it serves their interests. Many of their nations maintain peace through mutual benefit rather than conquest. You would have us treat them as equals? A species that still fights wars on its own planet? I would have us treat them as what they are. A species too stubborn to conquer, too dangerous to antagonize, and too useful as potential allies to destroy. The debate raged for another 6 hours. Counselors argued, factions formed, military advisors presented conflicting data. Through it all, I stood at attention, waiting for the verdict that would determine both my fate and humanity's. Finally, Draxkor called for silence. Commander Vex'thar, the Council has reached a decision. Your tactical assessment is noted, but it conflicts with the majority opinion. Therefore, you are hereby relieved of command and reassigned to administrative duties. Fleet Admiral Korthax will lead a full invasion force to Earth within the next 60 cycles. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear. Certain. As you command, High Chancellor. I have one request. Speak. When the invasion fails, when Korthax sends distress calls from orbit because he underestimated what 9 billion humans can do when threatened, remember this conversation. Draxkor's eyes narrowed. You seem very confident in human capabilities, Commander. Perhaps too confident. Perhaps your time with them has compromised your loyalty. My loyalty is to the Empire, High Chancellor, which is precisely why I am trying to save it from making a catastrophic mistake. Dismissed. I saluted and left the chamber. My military career in ruins, but as I walked through the corridors of the High Council building, I felt no regret. I had done what I could. I had warned them. What happened next was on their heads. 67 cycles later, I was working at a supply depot on the Outer Rim, managing inventory shipments when the emergency broadcasts began. Fleet Admiral Korthax had attacked Earth with a force of 300 warships. The initial bombardment had destroyed several major cities. Human casualties were estimated in the hundreds of millions. It should have been over in days. It had been 3 months, and the humans were winning. I pulled up the combat reports, reading through them with a mixture of vindication and sorrow. The humans had adapted faster than anyone predicted. They reverse-engineered captured Kethros technology. They built weapons specifically designed to exploit weaknesses in our ship armor. They launched suicide attacks against our supply lines, and they spread across their solar system like a virus, establishing hidden bases on moons and asteroids, turning their entire star system into a fortress. Korthax's fleet was down to 74 functional ships. He was requesting immediate reinforcements and threatening retreat if they were not provided. The High Council was in chaos. My comm terminal chirped. An encrypted message, priority clearance. I opened it and found myself looking at Draxkor's face. Commander Vex'thar, he said, his voice lacking its usual authority. Your presence is requested at an emergency council session. Immediately, when I arrived, the council chamber was nearly empty. Just Draxkor and 4 senior military advisors. We were wrong, Draxkor said without preamble. You were right, the humans are undefeatable through conventional conquest. I know, I said simply. Korthax wants to use planet-killer weapons. Destroy Earth entirely rather than admit defeat. My thermal pits flared. That would be genocide, and strategically pointless. The humans have spread throughout their system. Destroying their homeworld would only make the survivors more determined, which is why we are not going to do it. Instead, we are going to negotiate a ceasefire, and you are going to be our representative. I stared at him. Why me? Because you are the only Kethros commander who retreated from Earth and lived to explain why. The humans respect that. One of their representatives specifically requested you by name. Which representative? Draxkor activated a holographic display, and I found myself looking at a familiar face. Lieutenant Riley Voss, now apparently a major, sat in what looked like a military briefing room. Her left arm was mechanical now, replaced after the damage from our fight, but her eyes were the same, sharp, intelligent, and carrying that hint of dangerous humor. Hello, Commander Vex'thar, she said through the recording. Heard you got demoted for being too smart. Humans appreciate that quality. Looking forward to our chat. Try not to order me to disarm this time. Despite everything, I felt my mandibles flex in what humans would recognize as a smile. Tell them I accept, I said. The peace negotiations took place on a neutral station, with representatives from a dozen other species observing. The humans arrived with a delegation that included military leaders, politicians and scientists. Major Riley Voss was among them. When we met in the diplomatic suite, she offered her hand in the human gesture of greeting. I extended my primary appendage and touched her palm gently, mindful of the strength difference. "Commander," she said. "Good to see you without the whole trying to kill each other thing." "The pleasure is mutual, Major. I see you survived your injuries." "Barely. 3 weeks in medical. They said I should have died." She grinned. "Guess I'm just too stubborn." "Yes," I said. "I noticed." The negotiations lasted 4 days. The humans drove a hard bargain, but they were also willing to compromise. They wanted recognition of Earth's sovereignty, guaranteed borders, and trade agreements. In exchange, they offered non-aggression pacts and limited technology sharing. On the final day, after the treaties were signed, Riley and I stood on the observation deck, watching the stars. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course." "Why did you really retreat that day?" "I know about the antimatter detonator, but we both know I was bluffing about using it." I considered my answer carefully, because in that moment I realized something. The Kethros Empire has been conquering worlds for 1,000 cycles. We have become very efficient at it, but we have forgotten what it means to face an enemy that truly refuses to lose. And that scared you. Yes. Because I understood that even if I killed you, even if we took Earth, there would always another human like you, and another, until eventually, one of them would find a way to make us pay a price too high to bear. She nodded slowly. "You know what the scariest part is, Commander? You were right." We stood in silence for a moment, 2 warriors from different worlds, united by the understanding that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose not to fight. "Major Voss," I said. "May I ask you a question now?" "Shoot." "That detonator. If I had not retreated, would you truly have used it?" She looked at me, and that smile returned. That same, impossible smile from the laboratory. "Commander, I really hope you never have to find out the answer to that question." And somehow I knew that was the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. The Human Kethros Treaty was signed 3 days later. Earth joined the galactic community not as a conquer world, but as an independent power. And I, the disgraced commander who had retreated from a single human, became the Empire's ambassador to Earth. The High Council called it exile. I called it the smartest assignment of my career. Because I had learned something that day in the laboratory, something that would reshape my understanding of warfare and conquest. The strongest warrior is not always the one who wins the battle. Sometimes it is the one who knows which battles should never be fought at all. And humanity, with their stubborn refusal to quit, their endless capacity for innovation, and their absolute conviction that surrender was never an option, had taught me that lesson in the most unforgettable way possible. By smiling at me when they should have been terrified, by fighting when logic said they should surrender, by turning my order to disarm into the first step toward my complete and total defeat. That human, Riley Voss, had been right about one thing. Ordering her to disarm had been my first mistake. My second mistake would have been not learning from it.